right, welcome back to Business Today. And we understand as a country that the central bank is very, especially when it comes to matters monetary policy in the country. Now, Kenya has clinched the Central Bank Governor of the Year award. CBK Governor Dr. Kamau Thuge was featured as the African Bankers at the African Bankers Awards. This even as the Kenyan economy actually is reeling from shocks such as a surge in global energy and food prices and climate factors that were exerting upwards pressure on food prices. But take a look.
Different shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine-Russian war. What should you expect from the Kenyan government, especially to stabilize the economy in respect to this?
Yes, I think those are obviously some of the difficult issues we've had to deal with. Over the last 3 or 4 years or so, we've had a multitude of shocks. The ones that you mentioned, there was the Russia-Ukraine conflict. More recently was the issue of the Middle East. And of course, even before that was the COVID-19. And the combination of all these shocks was to raise the inflation rate to levels that were very high even for us. In October of 2022, inflation reached 9.6%, which was actually well above our target, our upper target, which is 7.5. So we took the decision to really tighten monetary policy and to ensure that we come back to within our inflation targets. And we did do that. It was painful, but we have achieved it. And now we see the way going forward, what we need to do.
All right, congratulations to Dr. Thuge right there. But we want to delve into our discussion on finance bill and its impact on the SME sector. Small, medium-sized enterprises actually are the lifeline of Kenyan economy. And right now in studio, I'm joined by Victor Otieno, who's the MD for Consult. Thank you very much for making time. Victor, briefly, let us lay the foundation, because sometimes when we discuss even the impact of finance bill, sometimes you don't have the right context on where we're coming from. So when you talk about the small and medium-sized enterprises, where and how critical are they in Kenya's economy?
Thank you very much, Noah, for having me. I think as you rightly put it, and based on even successive international report, both national and international reports, we see SME continue to support socio-economic development in the country. The recent 2024 economic survey indicated that SMEs were able to employ upwards of 70% of new jobs created within the country. Looking broadly is 33% to GDP, over 30% in terms of employing young people. So SMEs are actually the engine of this country.
Definitely. Now the finance bill has come. And of course, top of the agenda, people will talk about the issues to do with bread, which is touching on food. And one of the other popular one has been the motor vehicle tax proposition. Talk to me, looking at this document, is it pro SMEs?
I think we probably need to look at this situation more broadly, in the sense of looking at it from the context of Vision 2030 and what the current government wants to achieve in terms of spurring socioeconomic development in the country. And specifically looking at the budget policy statement, which is the other side of the coin in terms of when we are able to raise funds, this is how we are going to invest to ensure that the economy is able to grow. And our GDP should largely be driven by private sector. Because what you notice the last 10 years is our GDP growth has been growing, but largely driven by public expenditure. So, USGR and ETC, which gives an indication of a growing economy, but it's not. So that's the context. So the first question that I would ask is, are the strategies put in the budget policy statement in the different sectors, SME, agriculture, ICT, are they good enough to allow for the economy to grow? Then once we're able to answer that, then you can come back to the finance bill and say, yes, this finance bill, if we're able to raise through whatever measures, we can be able to increase our economic output, and we're able to sustain continual taxation. If we don't answer that question, then we fail to really hold government to account. Because the BPS was launched in February. We've not seen any conversation around the same. And in our view, or our posture is that the strategies that have been put in a lot of these sectors are wanting. So if you look at SMEs, is a question of the Hustler Fund as the only fund to support SMEs. We know it has flaws. Looking at CAIPs, which is the County Aggregation Processing Centers, they are just mentioned in isolation, looking in terms of, we'll build this infrastructure and SMEs can just come there and do stuff. We don't see deliberate action in terms of getting access to market for SMEs in the East Africa Community area, in Africa, which then would allow SMEs to grow. And if you're able to tax them, then there is no issue. Otherwise, I think the finance bill is dead in the water, in the sense that you're going to tax SMEs right now and startups right now, but it curtails your ability to be able to get revenue next year. So we'll see continued missed targets in terms of in terms of tax collection. Why? Because you're taxing someone that you're not supporting. Okay. And that's where I think we have a challenge.
Yes, because that discussion about even the approach, and rightfully put so, the foundational issue is the budget policy statement. But you find that there is an element, I don't know whether it's just numbing one side of things, where we're so revenue driven, and the question now arises, is this a Kenyan playbook, or now are we in the multilateral Bretton Woods kind of 90s kind of SAPs, to be able, based on where we are financially, economically, matters to do with debt, to be able to get the support. It seems to be always revenue driven. Is that the case? Is the problem, the foundational problem, bigger than what you are saying?
I think the pressure to get revenue is warranted, in the sense that you want to be able to fully finance your budget through internal revenues, which is taxes. And of course, if you're looking at fiscal deficit has been growing over the years, and maybe previous government sought to get debt to be able to plug in the budget. But even if we are to raise and tax 100% of our revenues, it is not sustainable. We've seen submissions from CAM and different stakeholders saying that you are raising the cost of doing business. What would happen is, for those who are privileged enough, would shift their investment elsewhere. What does that mean? It means that whatever target that you have or you had in terms of revenue, you will not be able to achieve the same. Same for SMEs. We don't see sufficient incentives for SMEs to grow. No one has a problem paying taxes. You just need to be able to allocate resources, incentives for these people to grow, then apply taxation. Otherwise, if you say for example, we're going to have a digital services tax, to already an SME who's already paying either turnover tax, is paying corporate tax, is paying. There's an introduction on vehicles. You're already burdening and increasing the cost of business for this SME. That even if we manage to eke tax this year, next year, we are going to be in a lot of trouble, which would mean jobs lost, and of course FDI shifting to our neighbors.
Definitely. Just the specifics within this finance bill and some of the propositions. I know you've touched a little bit on the motor vehicle tax, of which majority of small and medium-sized enterprises they utilize. Is a cost in business. So if you tax that, also it becomes an element. But help me point out other elements within the bill that you see is actually will drag the SME sector behind.
So our hypothesis or our proposition is this, is that the government is speaking from both sides of the mouth. In the sense, on one side, let's say, for example, they want to action the Paris Agreement around environment. So, we want to reduce emissions, we want to take care of the environment. On the other hand, government wants to support digital economy, because what we've seen is SMEs are growing, yes, but they are stagnating or they are dying. So the digital economy, and looking at the manifesto and the MTP4 of the current government, has said clearly that their focus is on supporting SMEs, supporting agriculture, supporting the digital economy. If you want to support them, if you were to look at the finance bill, what are you doing to support? Have we seen any incentive around supporting digital platforms? We don't see that. Are we seeing any incentives for young people to be able to innovate? Actually, we are seeing the opposite. Looking at the eco levy, which is taxing even up to your earphones. If you're to buy a new piece, that would be taxed. Looking at taxing devices, and of course, this has a negative implication in terms of really trying to allow entrepreneurs within tech to get into that space. Again, looking at the digital economy general in terms of supporting the economy, and if you're to specifically look at the current economic review, we see some sectors that have tried to grow, but they are stifled: agriculture, ICT, transport and accommodation. So these are the very sectors that are being taxed, that are supposed to drive the economy and increase our economic output. So I think that's where we see an irony of sorts, in terms of, on one hand, you're saying we want to support these sectors, but on the other hand, you are putting punitive taxes that does not allow these sectors to grow. So that's the gist of what we see from the finance bill.
Okay, and it's quite interesting, because from observation, somebody will say, have we not learned from the current financial year that we're in, with the Finance Bill, now Finance Act 2023, have we not learned that economic principle of, I think they call it the Laffer curve, where you have to find a way of incentivizing, lowering, then you can widen, everyone can participate. If your purpose is always to reach out and take without incentivizing, then you end up collecting even less. Is it a lesson that we're ignoring?
I think it's a puzzle even for us, and that's why I think we've seen significant interest in terms of submissions and public participation towards this bill, because I think there is some madness, for lack of a better word, in terms of the sporadic nature in which we collect revenue. Last year, there was an introduction of a digital service tax at maybe 3%. This year, it's at 1.5%. Next year, probably it's going to be 2%. What that does is it doesn't give us predictability. Especially from an investor perspective. You want people make investments based on incentives and tax breaks that are given. So if I made an economic investment last year, and this year you hear that tax has gone up, yes. What basically that does, it creates jitters, and probably we will start seeing a significant shift in terms of FDI, in terms of brick and mortar investment in the country, shifting to economies within the region that allows for this business to grow. Remember, no one has an issue with paying taxes. You need a predictable environment. You need an environment that supports business. I was reading yesterday that KECOBO, the Kenya Copyrights Board, has introduced a new levy for restaurants for them to play music. So if you look at the cost of doing business in Kenya, it is increasing year on year. And I don't think we can be able to sustain that. We see manufacturing in terms of contribution to GDP declining year on year. Come are shouting, they're like, if we continue with this trajectory, investments are going to shift from this country to elsewhere. And the SMEs will never enter into manufacturing. They will continue to trade, and we know trade is not sustainable. The profit margins are thin, and they will continue to be dependent on cash flow loans such as the Hustler Fund, which is not sustainable.
And in closing, briefly touch on, I know one of the proposition is the whole issue of excise on financial transactions, and this marries closely with the SME sector, especially when it comes to the issue of credit. If this proposition in the Finance Bill 2024 is to go through as is, what will that do on matters credit supply to the SMEs?
I mean, it will disseminate, it will completely kill. We already have a bad situation in terms of financial access by small businesses. Over the years, we've seen financial banks not lend more than 20% of their loan portfolio to SMEs. That has not changed, even without adding any extra cost. And because majorly financial institutions are risk averse, either they will pass the cost to the SME, or altogether they will just go and trade with government securities, which is not a good thing for small businesses. The sad thing is also from a private sector perspective in terms of fintechs, whose interests are already high because they are taking a big risk lending to SMEs. It means that again the cost of that loan is going to be high. And if you're to compare that with the return on investment on where SMEs invest, it is not sustainable. No. So I think the rallying call for us is to look at this issue holistically in terms of what incentives are we giving to startups and SMEs in terms of growth, then possibly have a way of taxing gradually so that it's not a shock and in a predictable manner.
All right. Predictability, very, very important. Thank you very much, Victor, for making time to speak to business today. Victor Otieno is the MD, VIFA Consult, and he says that creating a predictable environment is very critical, but also offer incentives to the small and medium-sized enterprises, enable them to grow, enable them to transition from trade to go into manufacturing, because as it is not sustainable, and that's why we're experiencing a lot of death when it comes to our small and medium businesses. And that is Matters Finance Bill and SME sector. Thank you very much. We want to put a full stop. Our time is up on Business Today. Thank you very much for joining with us over the past 1 hour. Up next, we have KTN. Stay tuned. I'm not Kip Kamboy. Good afternoon.